In the small town of Cedar Hollow, Nebraska, where the cornfields stretched gold under the morning sun, every farmer knew the same routine. When the harvest fell short or the rains came late, you went to the bank, signed the loan papers, and hoped for the best. Nobody read the fine print. The lines were too small, the words too complicated, and besides, what choice did a working farmer have? You needed the money today, not tomorrow. Except for one man. Jack Walker. Jack was different, though nobody could quite explain why this was so. He had only finished a couple of semesters at the community college before his father passed, and the family farm became his responsibility. But Jack had a habit his neighbors found strange, even a little foolish. Before he signed anything, he read every single word. He read it twice. If he didn't understand a clause, he drove 15 miles into town to ask his old high school teacher, Mr. Daniels, to explain it to him over coffee at the diner. "Why waste your time, Jack?" His cousin Tommy laughed one evening at the feed store, leaning against his truck. "The loan officer's already decided what's good for us. Just sign it and go home." "A signature is a promise," Jack said quietly, not looking up from the page. "I want to know exactly what I'm promising." The other farmers shook their heads and went about their lives. Jack's own mother sometimes worried about him too. "People are gonna think you don't trust the bank," she said one evening, setting plates on the kitchen table. "They'll think you're proud or difficult." "I'm not proud, Mama," Jack answered. "I just want to know what I'm agreeing to before I put my name on it. A man ought to understand the weight of his own promises." She didn't argue further, though she still shook her head whenever she saw him sitting on the porch with a loan contract spread across his knees, lips moving silently as he worked through each paragraph like a man studying for a test he couldn't afford to fail. That year, like every year, the farmers of Cedar Hollow took out loans from Heartland Farmers Bank to cover seed, fertilizer, and fuel for the tractors. Jack took a loan too, the same as everyone else. But before he signed, he sat on his porch for 3 full evenings, going through every paragraph of the contract with Mr. Daniels. Most of it was ordinary. Interest rate, repayment schedule, late payment penalties. But buried on page 7, in a small paragraph nobody else had ever bothered to notice, was a clause titled, "Force Majeure and Disaster Relief Provision." It stated that if a federally declared natural disaster, drought, flood, or crop failure certified by the USDA, affected the borrower's land, the bank was contractually required to freeze the loan for 1 full season without penalty, and offer restructuring at the original interest rate rather than the steep default rate usually applied to delinquent accounts. Jack read it 3 times. He folded the page and tucked a copy into the old metal box in his closet, next to his father's pocket watch. 2 years passed. The corn was good, the loans were paid, and life carried on the way it always had in Cedar Hollow. It started slowly, a dry spring, then a drier summer with barely a cloud in sight. By the 3rd year, the creek that fed half the county's irrigation had run dry by June. The wells dropped lower every week, and the old hand pump behind the grain elevator coughed up nothing but rust and dust. Corn that should have stood shoulder high was thin and brown, gasping in the cracked soil. Kids stopped playing ball in the empty lot behind the school because the dust rose too thick to breathe. The USDA eventually declared the county a federal disaster area, but by then, half the farmers had already missed their loan payments. The bank did not wait long. Notices began arriving in the mail, stiff white envelopes stamped in red. Payment overdue. Final notice. Folks said the mail carrier himself had started avoiding eye contact, as if even he felt the weight of what he carried each morning. One by one, families were called into the branch office downtown, where a sharp young loan officer named Mr. Brian Cole explained, in a tone that was polite but immovable, that the bank had every legal right to foreclose if payments weren't brought current within 30 days. Tommy's hand shook as he read his notice. "Jack, what are we gonna do? They'll take the land Grandpa built with his own hands." "Yeah, it was in the paper last week." "Then come with me to the bank. Ask them about the disaster relief clause in your contract, page 7. "What clause?" Jack sighed and walked with him to the bank himself. When Jack's turn came, he walked in calmly, almost smiling, and placed 2 documents on the desk. The first was his original loan contract, page 7 marked with a small pencil tick beside the disaster relief clause. The second was a printed copy of the federal disaster declaration for the county, dated 2 weeks before his payment had become overdue. Mr. Cole frowned, scanning the page. He'd only transferred to this branch a year earlier and had clearly never been asked about this clause before. He read it once, then again, his confidence flickering. "This clause is old," he said carefully. "It might not be standard practice anymore. It was standard enough to be in the contract I signed, with the bank's own stamp on every page," Jack replied, still calm. "And a contract doesn't change just because it becomes inconvenient for one side. You understand," Mr. Cole tried, "that honoring this for one farmer means we may have to honor it for everyone else too. Might be simpler if we just worked out a quiet extension off the books without dragging this old paragraph into it." "Simpler for the bank, maybe," Jack said. "But I didn't sign a quiet extension. I signed this contract. I'd like the bank to honor it, exactly as written, exactly as it was given to me." Mr. Cole excused himself and came back 20 minutes later with the branch's senior compliance officer, a tired-looking man with reading glasses pushed up on his nose. He examined the clause carefully, cross-checked it against the bank's master template, flipping back and forth between the 2 documents, and finally nodded with visible reluctance. "The clause is valid," he admitted, setting the papers down. "It was standard in older contracts before our policy update. Mr. Walker's loan falls under the old terms, and the federal declaration satisfies the disaster condition. There's nothing to dispute here." Word spread through Cedar Hollow before Jack had even made it home. By evening, farmers were digging through filing cabinets and shoeboxes, hunting desperately for page 7, for any mention of force majeure or disaster relief, anything that might save their land. Wives held flashlights steady, while their husbands squinted at paragraphs they'd never once read before that night. Most found nothing. Their contracts were newer, the clause quietly stripped out in a policy revision nobody had ever bothered to explain to trusting customers. A few discovered, with relief, that they too had signed under the old terms. Tommy found the clause in his own contract that night, his hands trembling with something other than fear this time. "You knew," he said to Jack the next morning, equal parts amazed and grateful. "This whole time, you knew this could save us." "I didn't know there'd be a drought," Jack said, folding his hands calmly. "I just knew I should understand what I was agreeing to. That's all." The bank, facing the prospect of a formal complaint to the State Banking Commission and unwanted attention from a local newspaper reporter who'd caught wind of the story, quietly agreed to honor the clause for every farmer whose contract included it. Loans were frozen for the season. No land was foreclosed. No families were put out of their homes. Jack's name became a quiet legend around Cedar Hollow after that, the kind folks repeated at the diner counter for years. Not because he'd outsmarted anyone through trickery, but because he'd simply done what anyone could have done. He'd read what he signed. The following spring, when the rains finally returned and the fields turned green again, Mr. Daniels began holding small evening classes at the library, teaching anyone willing to come how to read a loan contract properly, what to look for, which questions to ask, why no signature should ever be rushed, and why one overlooked paragraph could mean the difference between keeping a home and losing it. Jack sat in the back row each evening, listening as carefully as the others, because even the man who'd read the fine print once knew there was always more to learn. When the bank sent a new representative that year to renew the town's loans, the farmers didn't shuffle nervously into the office anymore. They walked in together, contracts in hand, reading every line before they signed. And among them, as always, Jack Walker sat quietly, smiling, not because he'd beaten the bank, but because an entire town had finally learned that the smallest print can carry the heaviest weight, and that a single signature, once understood, could protect a man's home far better than fear ever could.